The drug trade was pursued much more violently in the Cape Flats, and therefore it needed a sterner response. Now, when we say a sterner response, drugs were pushed with violence and fear. So PAGAD felt that we needed to overcome that fear. The strange thing is, you remember the one of the big media events that happened was the killing of Rashad Staghi. I was a member of Qibla. I supported Qibla at the time. I was in prison under the detention without trial for 3 months because I was a Qibla member. Qibla was an anti-apartheid organization. I said it is an anti-apartheid organization that originated in and around the Athlone area as well. But it was a coming together of people that felt and it was headed by Imam Ahmad Qasim at the time, who's passed on now. But it was a group of people who felt that we need to oppose apartheid. But people who might have had divergent views to the predominant ANC or Charterist line and felt that they needed to do something different and actually make sure that people know that there is a vehicle for people who believe that the Almighty has a way for you, and that way is not to suffer under oppression. And that is essentially the liberatory position that Qibla had. You might know that various active youth communities around the world, when you have youth activism, and especially if that youth activism starts questioning the political domain. If youth activism, you take it anywhere in the world, through lots of ages. If youth activism has challenged the status quo of the politicians, it's followed by an influx of drugs. And Western Cape is no different, right? In South America, the same sort of thing. The various communities all over the world, you have activism, youth activism, it's replaced by making people divert themselves and divert entire communities to it. And now, when we're looking at the Cape Flats and we look at the challenges, then you say the cycle of violence, the cycle of drugs, the cycle of what families have to deal with is such that the good ones are trying to keep the family together. The ones that have been taken by crime and drugs, they're doing whatever they do and they're bringing the whole family down. And that is why every person that can be saved from this kind of trauma must be saved. Cape Flats has been sort of at the center of lots of violence for many, many years. And I think if we look at how things play out in history across the world, then we might see parallels. But if we're looking at recent history, recent as in the last 2-3 years, there's been a sort of ballooning of the type of violence that actually is perpetrated. And I think it's systemic. We believe that it is something of how society has evolved. Less humanity, more violence, less care for the next person, less concern, and therefore, and in fact, no consequences to your actions. And that takes away all the limits that individuals have on what they do. That's what plays out, I think, in the Western Cape. When it comes to, as things have unfolded, if I talk about PAGAD, for example, PAGAD started in 1994, 95. PAGAD is People Against Gangsterism and Drugs. Okay, so one of the things that's interesting is the person who coined that name His grandson is now assistant coordinator for PAGAD in the Western Cape, right? Brian Francis is the one that said, PAGAD, people, we are against gangsterism and we are against drugs. Therefore, why not? That's before I joined PAGAD, but essentially that's what happens, and this is the beauty of it. That's what PAGAD is. Why was it started? It started before the name was formed. So it's not a group of people who got together and said, we're going to form this organization, write a major policy document, doesn't implement half of it. It was a group of people who realized there's all over the place, there are drug dealers that are actually pumping our children full of drugs. And another sort of watershed moment that I feel is important is one of the other people who were stalwarts in PAGAD attended a meeting in Wynberg where people were for the so manyth time meeting in a hall and saying, we need to do something because the drug dealer around the corner is doing this, and another person gets up and says, yes, this is the problem, that's the problem. And with Sali, Doji got up and he said, guys, we're going to be doing this all the time. We're just talking to each other. Why don't we go show the people where the drug dealer is? We take to the road and we go tell the drug dealer we're not happy. That was the start of people putting people on the road. And it carried on for quite a few years, where people started to overcome the fear that they had for the drug dealers. And now you're asking, what's the origin of PAGAD? It was a coming together of lots of people who had shared concerns about the destruction that the drug dealers were causing in the Cape Flats. And instead of each one being a disparate force, saying, let's come together and all be people against gangsterism and drugs. That's the common thread. And therein was the success factor of people saying, yes, what the hell, I'm also against gangsterism, I'm also against drugs. And lots of people who simply felt, I've had enough of this, and now there's 1,000 other people out there that's doing their thing, I'm going to throw my lot in with this. And that was when PAGAD took to the streets and actually showed the drug dealers that, we're not afraid of you. As I said, one of the first meetings it wasn't called PAGAD at the time, but it was in Wynberg. There were meetings in people from Surrey Estate. But now when PAGAD took really to the streets, it was centered around Gatesville, at the mosque in Gatesville, but it wasn't purely in Gatesville. The people that came from Mitchell's Plain, the furthest part of Mitchell's Plain, Strandfontein, came from Elsie's River, Delft, Kensington, Woodstock, Maitland, Wynberg, all over, Grassy Park, and PAGAD still has that sort of footprint. And it wasn't, so that's really the whole of, in fact, some of the southern suburbs and so on included. But PAGAD had a scope of much wider, even at the beginning, much wider than just Athlone, for example, or Manenberg. It was Manenberg, Bonteheuwel, Sherwood Park, all of those areas. When PAGAD took to the street and were hitting and isolating and when I say hitting, you're hitting the business of the small drug dealer on the street. The state and all those big money people knew they can't shoot this thing down because it's something that is real, it's affecting people, and you can't say this is bad, okay? But when PAGAD took to the street and started rattling the cages of the real bigger drug dealers, the funders, and so on, so the state had to do something to protect their sponsors, because that's what's happened. And two things that happened. It would be if you do your research, some two studies that were done in 96. The first one was to establish why PAGAD was in the hearts of the people of the Cape Flats. And that was because people had no confidence in the police and had lots of confidence in the fact that PAGAD could keep the streets safe, okay? Had already given up on state infrastructure because there was no one supporting them, and the fact that people felt they wanted to be lifted out of the problem that they had, okay? So this was a first study that was made. It was Mitchell's Plain based, it was generally Cape Flats. And that was published. And then a follow-up study was for the same group of people asking, what would change your mind if you are feeling very committed to a particular thing? And that second thing said, if their religious leaders told them it's a bad idea. And within a month of the second report coming out, the MJC came out with a statement that PAGAD is a bad idea.
What is MJC?
Muslim Judicial Council, who claims to be the leadership of the Muslims, right? So this group of leadership, of supposed Muslim leadership, came out with a front page Cape Times article, which was very conveniently mooted by the media to say PAGAD is this problem, that problem, that problem. And it fell into the alienation trap of the people. But it's how the people who calculate how to undermine an organization, a few months, no, it's about in the same time. There was a person, so you know that there were many PAGAD people that were standing trial and bail applications were opposed and so on. But in the early days, one person was, he was in custody and he came to Wynberg Court for his bail application. So this was early days of PAGAD. And I was shocked when, in opposing bail, the prosecutor, remember this was now a new South African, the prosecutor used records of this particular guy to tell the magistrate he shouldn't grant this guy bail because he's got the propensity for violence. What was his basis? The guy was arrested and convicted before for being part of an anti-apartheid struggle. And the state at the time used that against a person in the new South Africa fighting drugs. Can you see what PAGAD was up against? Now, it was easy for the prosecutor then to use the prejudiced magistrate's brain to say, this guy that you're trying to, don't look at it through a new face. And don't look at it with a fresh mind. Look at this guy's previous conviction. But in real terms, if we expected Mr. Nelson Mandela's previous conviction to be forgotten by the world, why is it that another person who also fought apartheid has to be accountable for that in a negative way in the new South Africa? But this happened in South Africa's courts. Ne? Number two, P.W. Botha, who you might know, he, in Parliament, made a big thing about Qibla, the Qibla PAC link, and how Qibla was sending people outside the country to fight, to be trained, right? Now, what happened is that the people around that were pro-apartheid had been conditioned to be opposed to Qibla. So calling Qibla militant, calling Qibla certain things. Now, as much as we say people supported the anti-apartheid thing, they didn't. Those of us who fought in the trenches, when I say fought in the trenches, did things to try and make it as uncomfortable for the apartheid government as possible, knew that you walk down the street, the older people said, or some people said, what are these children doing now? They're just making ructions. When you go into the mosque, they say, no, why are you bringing your politics in here? This was the reality. When apartheid was wiped off, supposedly, the slates, these were the same people who came forward and said, we fought against apartheid. They lied. But the thing that stayed in people's minds, despite the liberation, is that Qibla is a bad organization. That's what they were poisoned with before. So when you're asking the question about Qibla and PAGAD, that same poison that was still in people's minds was more convenient to be used by those who wielded the pen to say, beware guys, these guys were in PAGAD, they're just an extension of Qibla. I still believe the state and media used the pre-existing prejudice against Qibla to label it on PAGAD so that PAGAD can also, people can also find a distance between themselves and PAGAD. The violence that was perpetrated by gangsters in order to further the drug trade was escalating exponentially. So you must just also know that in other parts of the country at the time, the drug dealers were quite happy to pitch their turf and sell drugs as a normal commercial entity. Yes, under the radar, but they did. Here, drugs were being pushed not only to the rich, but to the poor. And therefore, there was street traders all over the place. And obviously, fighting for turf is what was happening. People were dying, being killed in the crossfire. The people who were the traders for them were basically caught inside that web, and were finding, you were finding family members in the gutters because they were involved with the drug trade. So the drug trade was pursued much more violently in the Cape Flats, and therefore it needed a sterner response. Now, when we say a sterner response, drugs were pushed with violence and fear. So PAGAD felt that we needed to overcome that fear, to the point that, when a guy next door started selling drugs, you would look at it and people would say no, or they're afraid to tell the guy to stop. That's the thinking that PAGAD came to undo. The manifestation of it is that in the past, everybody other than the drug dealer had to have high fences to protect themselves. After PAGAD came in, the highest fences and most security was at the drug dealer's house. The strange thing is, you remember the one of the big media events that happened was the killing of Rashad Staghi in Woodstock. And I was on a job assignment in the US at the time when it hit the papers. And I got these snippets, that time there wasn't cell phones and stuff, but I got these snippets of information and so on. And I then didn't know what was going on. But the moment when I came back and the person who fetched me from the airport said, Kasim, there's things happening here. You must go. You will want to see this. But it's because people think of certain individuals and people and everybody that felt it was important to rectify the situation with regard to the apartheid onslaught was almost identified as the same kind of person that would want to identify with this. Right? So at that stage, I didn't know what was happening. But if the very next day, this person said, come, there's a meeting in Gatesville, and that's when I went. When I listened to people there, I thought, sure, this is actually a good thing. So, and I believe there's lots of people like that joined in the same way. Heard other people were taking on this fight and presented themselves at the public meeting, and actually it snowballed. It snowballed in that way. So that was my journey into PAGAD. We didn't look back since then. I still believe it's the right thing to do. The fact that the state decided at some stage to bring out a unit called Crimes Against the State when drug dealers died, and persecuted and prosecuted PAGAD members under that, must also give you an indication of what we're dealing with. But personal journeys like my own, where I knew nothing of what was happening, I thought it was a good idea, others thought it might be a good idea, and there were other people who were directly affected, whose children were involved in drugs, and they felt, I need to lift myself out of this. These different people have gone and met each other in this way. So now I just want to say, individuals like myself, I've learned a lot in PAGAD. One of the things is, if I look at my personal journey, despite the fact that we were involved with anti-apartheid struggles and so on, it was maybe while I was at varsity, it was student struggle, it was sort of compartmentalized in a certain way. But in PAGAD, it was from all walks of life. People that I met were people that was not on the same educational spectrum, same financial situation, same location. The only common factor, same religion, the only common factor that we had was we were against gangsterism and drugs. And that was the beauty, and continues to be the beauty of how we grow, in PAGAD. The reason for PAGAD's starting is because of the nuisance that the drug dealers and gangsters were creating. The second thing is that they openly and they operated with impunity and openly. Therefore, there was no deep investigation that was needed. But when PAGAD took to the street and went to any particular area, if you went to Bridgetown and you asked, we're going to go in, and still now, the other day we were in Lotus Rivers, we were saying we're going to start walking from here. So this group of people say, no, but you must walk this way because there's more drug dealers in this side. No, we must walk that way. It was the same then. It was a case where everybody knew that they wanted you to go past their drug dealer. The important thing was that as the journey began, it was a case where first, the drug dealers who were just taking their chances decided, we're stopping. Yes, PAGAD came to my house and said because this was the pattern. We in Bridgetown now, we're going down this road, and we're telling the drug dealer, the community is fed up with you. We're giving you a chance to stop. Stop, or you'll see that the community is now fed up with you. We're going to sort you out. What that sorting out was not important, but it was to say, we're not going to tolerate you in your form now. So what happened initially was lots of drug dealers made contact with the PAGAD leadership and came and said, we're going to stop. But PAGAD said, you've made so much out of your community. You can't just now stop and say, it's fine. You got to put something back into your community to show that you are, show your remorse. Some of them did, some of them didn't, some of them stopped. And some just increased the height of their walls because their paymasters or whatever did it. But in essence, the start of it wasn't a list to say we're going for this person, that person, that person. It was, there's a call, come to the Crawford area, come to that side. Okay, this is the merchant in this area, let's go to him. That was it. Yes, there were some of the places where it was a bit more difficult, like when you're going to Rylands, people say, but why are you going here? That's because that guy doesn't sell from his house. But he's got other merchants that sell. He's the rich guy. And it's that sort of thing that also happened later on. And when that happened, businessmen said, hey, but that's my friend. And PAGAD didn't maintain its popularity with these because it was okay to take on the poor guy. When you're taking on this guy's rich friend, he suddenly says, well, no, I'm not going to be associated with this. We would be naive to think that an organization like PAGAD, with as many enemies as we have, and especially on the side of the state, that there wouldn't be attempts to infiltrate. So, and at the time when lots of people claimed No, there's a very tight grip, and everybody, like PAGAD must take responsibility for everything that's attributed to it. We can't have it both ways. Yes, PAGAD lit a flame and started energizing communities. But for every movement like PAGAD, where we're saying, guys, we're controlling this. Now, I just want to tell you, so this is the situation. You go down a road and you say to the drug dealer, the community has approached PAGAD, community is now PAGAD and saying, you must stop your drug dealing. And then he asks, and then what are you going to do? Then our answer is, you will have to see what the consequences are. The community is going to decide and they will do whatever they're going to do. But we're telling you on behalf of the community, we're not happy with you. Now, there are a few things that happen. The reality is, that guy doesn't hesitate to kill you. You have to say to yourself, there are people that are fed up. The police is not doing anything about it. PAGAD is saying, guys, we're going to come and tell you, we've had enough of you. So if we go and write a letter to him, you know he's just going to tear it up. You've got to go strong arm him. Sometimes it was a case where it might have been an organized group of PAGAD people, and other times it's people who say, no, but we understand the sentiment. We run parallel to this, and we're going to go and sort that guy out without another person giving us the okay to do it, because the principle is the same. And that is why it's important to note that lots of times people have asked, when I was spokesperson, when Abida or anybody else was spokesperson, they asked the question, do you take responsibility for, say, an attack on a drug dealer? Now, you know, PAGAD doesn't just say it as a slogan, drug dealers must die. You stop or die. We believe it's the right thing to do. The fact that death penalty was abolished is a shame and a shambles, actually, because the police can still shoot the person if he thinks he's being endangered and kill him. But you can't take a guy to a constitutional court or the highest court in the land and say, you've just killed 12 people, now you're going to get the death penalty. I might be diverting, but I'm saying that when we were asked, do you take responsibility for this? We say no. We actually laud the fact, we actually applaud the fact that this drug dealer is no more. But we didn't plan it. We didn't organize it. The fact that whoever did it, that's their problem. But we still say the world is a better place with this drug dealer out of the way. Now, when that sort of fluid organization exists and you have enemies, and the enemies being well-resourced like the state is, or like the mega drug dealers, or when they come together, then you can pay people to say, you go and present yourself as a very strong guy in PAGAD, because that guy knows he can do this with impunity. So there was a time when things were attributed to PAGAD, especially, I mean, there was bombs that were attributed to PAGAD, explosions. And lots of the media were saying a whole lot of things. But when it emerged that a guy was arrested on the road with a bomb, and he said he was part of the National Intelligence Agency, he was planted in PAGAD. Suddenly everything went quiet. Nobody spoke about it. Nobody wanted to talk about it. And then you ask yourself, was it part of a discrediting campaign? Was it part of a campaign to sort of run parallel and then try and expose? You know, at the end of the day, yes, PAGAD was infiltrated. But there's also a case, and we're not surprised by it. It's just that there's always a thing where people think, hey, you know what, we've now been infiltrated, we're going to close shop. That's a negative way of thinking. You just got to bolster things, you got to change things, you got to make sure that it doesn't happen. But it will always happen if you are fluid, if you're trying to do the right thing. There'll be opposition, and you've just got to be trying to minimize the damage. When you look at resistance and awareness, if, as I said, if you think of the Western Cape youth as a potential to be, if their minds are clear, then they can wake up and realize that we're being taken for a ride by the political parties. And if their minds are clear, they will do that because they have the vuma to do it. But if their minds aren't clear, they will remain neutralized. And that's what the drugs do. The second thing is that the paymasters for many political parties are drug dealers. And therefore, the political parties have to, and I mean, even the liberation organizations at the time said they funded their campaigns with drug money. At the time when there were lots of drug dealers that was making easy money here in Cape Town, when PAGAD hit the ground here, the drug prices went up, the security went up, and lots of drug dealers moved out to the outer areas, right? It's unfortunate, it caused problems further afield, and those people are still suffering. They're suffering now, they're calling, and they're asking for assistance. What we find, and I want to talk about now first before going to that history, what we're finding now is that when we are responding to people who are calling for assistance, we first arm them with the knowledge that if you choose to associate with PAGAD, you will find opposition from various organizations, including intelligence and police. And I promise you, in every instance, these people look at us and think, I don't know what you're talking about, because they don't know. As soon as it becomes clear, and as soon as they advertise that we are now associated with PAGAD, these people get visits from the local police, the broader police intelligence community, and politicians. And in the past, it's either a case of, we think you're doing the wrong thing, we will sort out your problem. And those people said, but we asked you for sorting out this problem for a long time and you haven't done it. No, we see you're serious now, we will sort out your problem. Once the people cut ties with PAGAD, then those politicians and intelligence people also leave. The second strategy which is happening also around is they threaten the people. You know what? While you're still trying to find your feet, if the gangsters find out you involved with this, remember you're on your own. And then the people get a bit hesitant, and then they distance themselves. Now, at the time when PAGAD was on the road all the time, there were various organizations and people around East London, Port Elizabeth, Durban, Pinetown, and in Pretoria, Johannesburg, that had actually said, we want to do a similar thing here. And they did, and there were branches all over the place, and it became a national structure, which it still is today. However, you must know that at some stage, PAGAD in the Western Cape had 500 trials going at the same time. 500 people on trial. And this was the onslaught from the state to say, anybody that's going to do anything, we're going to take you on. They just arrested people and you have to now prove your innocence. And this was the sort of thing that probably understandably frightened people off. They would then go to the satellite areas and say, you're not so close to these people, so do you really still want to be part of it? And people found reason to not be part of PAGAD. But I also want to tell you one other thing. We've been around the block a couple of times, not only in PAGAD. I'm still part of a neighborhood watch. I'm part of school governing bodies. There are different people in PAGAD that do a whole lot of things. Have you ever heard of somebody that says, I want to support you financially, I want to give you a donation, but I don't want a receipt? It happens in PAGAD. And you ask yourself why. Yeah, surely you want accountability, but people are afraid because if somebody finds out that they are supporting PAGAD, then the state is going to come after them. So now I'll tell you, you're thinking, oh, this is pie in the sky. How can it be? So because of the 500 people we had on trial, I was part of the people organizing the legal team. We went on a journey to Pretoria a couple of years ago and did what people do, write receipts, give to people, and so on. On our way down in Worcester, we were stopped. So we saw that there were three cars that were sort of trailing us all the time. We were in two vehicles. We were stopped outside Worcester. And one of the things they did was confiscated the receipt book and contacted all the people in that receipt book. Why are you supporting PAGAD? Now, this isn't a gangster doing, well, it's a real gangster, but it's not a gangster in gangster uniform. It's in police uniform doing the gangster's job. Now, what happens is that people who actually want to support, but they are afraid because state infrastructure is pushing. This is life's reality. You know, but Adam was arrested and he was charged at that stage. They confiscated his book. They went through it, and then we received calls from people. Why did you tell people that I'm sponsoring? I don't want to be known. And next time they either don't give you, or they tell you, take it, my friend, I don't want to see a receipt book. Now, is this real? It's real in the PAGAD world. But surely in a normal situation, you would want to have we want to be accountable. We've got all our finances in order. But we have to say, brother, in our receipt book, we instruct our people, every bit of money you receive, you must write it. But the guy doesn't want to be known. You understand? Why? Because the state will come after you. If I can just tell you, one of the problems that the people in Cape Town had for years and still have is disappearing dockets. A drug dealer goes to court, or a gangster goes to court, is standing trial, or is going to stand trial, third appearance, prosecutor says to the magistrates, we have to withdraw the case because the docket is gone. Withdraw the case. When PAGAD's cases started, the same state knew, hold it, what is our vulnerability in securing a conviction? The dockets get lost. So they put a particular place. They made a prosecuting authority that said all dockets, well, the first thing is, when a drug dealer dies, no local police is allowed to go onto the crime scene. They must only encircle it, and they would have a special unit that comes and combs the scene, picks up the clues, whatever happened. Secondly, the docket is not kept in the court. The docket goes to Bishop Levis there, right? And it must, from court, it must be returned to there. That's if it's a PAGAD case. And this is how careful they were. What that tells us is that South African police has the ability, the capability, if they have the willingness to solve the crime problem. But there's no accountability, there's no willingness, there's nothing like that. And this is what we have to change. PAGAD was, there's other life's realities that if you have a period where people decided, so the first phase was taking to the streets and telling drug dealers to stop. Then there were people who took on the drug dealers, head on. But they were, well, there's actually quite a lot that when we say you take on the drug dealer, when, you know, you go to any situation where a drug dealer is confronted, then if the police are on the scene, they take all the people's number plates, right? They come to your house, they confiscate your firearm because they say they're investigating a shooting there, which might not have happened. But now the person feels vulnerable. Hey, I don't have my firearm now. And they even publish names of people. So they arrest 6 guys for a supposed attack on a drug dealer in Bridgetown. They publish the names and the newspaper prints it, and then they go and they confiscate the people's firearms. So now they render you vulnerable. Can we blame people for saying, guys, I'm cooling off, right? But the second thing is that you have so many people that's awaiting trial, that's whatever. And the last thing is when media decides there's an attack on a drug dealer or PAGAD as a march here, and they decide to twist it to be an anti-state thing, whatever, Islamic, whatever nonsense they were coming up with, then we decided, you know what, if it is that we must do something in the interest of the community, we make it small, we maintain our visibility, but we don't publicize it. We don't have press conferences. We don't let people know whatever it is. We just do our thing. So if the rest of the world thought it's not happening, we still believe that if the people on the ground know, you know what, something's happening there. If I need help, I can call PAGAD. Then that's really what's there. After the persecution and prosecution and sentencing of people, it's now well documented that the intelligence community agency went and spoke to the individuals that were now sentenced and made deals with them that if they decide to cut themselves off from PAGAD, then they can be released. And so that's what they did. Like many organizations around the world will have high activity, low activity, hopefully never no activity. But that's what it is. Now, let's talk underground. In the past, in 1995, you could walk. So this is the irony of it. In 1995, you could exercise your right to protest in the way that PAGAD did it. Because of PAGAD, the new South African government brought in the old South African law of Gatherings Act. The Gatherings Act was actually a pre-1994 act in the event that people took to the streets. It was invoked only after PAGAD took to the street in order to stop PAGAD's activity. So you could no longer cover your faces, you couldn't carry firearms, you couldn't be more than 15 people at a time unless you had specific permission. Now the rolling out of this thing is starting then to say, hold it now, we have to get permission and prior notice to all of these people, you can't mobilize and so on. Now, when you're talking about underground, you're still saying, you know what is underground? When you're not allowed to carry your firearm in this thing, when you're not, then basically you're not doing what you're supposed to do. Now, PAGAD is saying, if it's not reasonable, we're not interested in the law because the law is not there to protect us or the community. The law is there to protect the gangsters, actually. PAGAD, after the incarceration of people who had worked in PAGAD, some might have been part of intelligence operations in the start, then there was a whole lot of people that went to prison. But as I was telling you earlier, that there were people who were in prison that were had then spoken to and were being spoken to by intelligence agencies. And when they were released, they decided, in fact, it was before some of them were released, they started issuing pamphlets and things undermining the PAGAD leadership. And at the time, we didn't really know where it was going, but and couldn't really put our fingers on the actual source. But later on, it became obvious that some group of guys that were in prison, that then came out, wanted to make a formation of their own. But the PAGAD leadership it's not about splintering, had called them to order, had said, you are what, and I'll tell you why, when I say wanted to do things on their own, is they became criminal elements themselves. PAGAD leadership called them in and said, guys, you're going to have an enemy in PAGAD if this is what you do. But they didn't relent, and they were expelled from PAGAD. They were told, you carry on with this thing, we don't want you as part of PAGAD. They then said, no, if you're going to expel us, we're going to form another group, and they called themselves the G-Force, which we call them the expelled members. Because G-Force was and is actually part of PAGAD. But we want people to be clear that those who call themselves the PAGAD G-Force are expelled members from PAGAD. Okay, that's a story for another day. But essentially, it's not about a leadership split that caused people to go in divergent directions. It was people who were in, some of them were in prison. When they came out, they decided they're going to go onto a criminal route. And it was the disciplinary course that was taken against them that they then were expelled, and then they still formed whatever on their own. So then subsequent to that, some of those people have also sort of distanced themselves even from that group. But I think that even is a sad reality that happens to many organizations. But the important thing that we believe we need to say is that, yes, these are people that had and have very good skills and were friends, actually. You know, I would say, I would be able to say this was a friend, that was a friend. But when, and this is the problem in many organizations, if your friend turns bad, you don't stick with him. We rather become supposedly weakened and maintain our principal position than compromise in saying, okay, guys, you do what you do, but let's not be caught about this. But then you can still be part of PAGAD. The success, that's failure. If you accept that somebody is going a divergent route, but because you either know him or because he's strong or he's got the right connections, you keep him in your circle, that's where political parties have gone and have gone wrong. We said, no, it's not going to happen. You are either towing the line that PAGAD says you are, or you're going to be expelled. And those people who didn't want to toe the line, they were expelled. And so there is no two PAGADs or whatever. It's only a sad reality that those who have decided to go the criminal route, they've been expelled. PAGAD exists maybe in a different form, but it still exists. And so when I say a different form, you know, you might think, okay, there's two people from PAGAD that I'm meeting. Maybe it's only two people in a fax machine, or not even a fax machine, because they don't do that anymore. Our reality is this. If you, the crime patterns haven't changed in the country. In fact, if there's any pattern, crime has skyrocketed. And you're asking, but now, did PAGAD make a difference? Is it still there? Is it less? Is it more? No, PAGAD is still there. Our thinking is that even if it is that we provide a safe haven or a recourse or a safety for one individual, we're doing a job. But fortunately, it's a lot more than that. Now, yes, we have counseling happening on an ongoing basis. We have call-outs happening where people saying, oh, they've shot on my house, or this drug dealer is threatening me. Call-outs, my son has disappeared. I don't know where he is, but they told me that he was with this guy before. Call-outs, my daughter was seen at the drug dealer's house, but I'm afraid to fetch her. These are realities that nobody's going to do that, but PAGAD does. Look, PAGAD is also journeyed now to be a a public benefit organization, so we're formally registered. We, do various things in terms of community outreach and so on. We encourage, in fact, we liaise with various police stations, but from a government point of view, there's never been a situation where they feel comfortable to engage. The only time, those years they engaged only to try and convince PAGAD not to continue. But we don't really believe that government is intent on getting rid of crime. The issue of crime budgets is only to get money awarded to various institutions. But government have no interest in getting rid of crime. So in case people think PAGAD doesn't exist, it will exist in an even bigger way once our counseling forum, our support center is opened. And by the grace of the Almighty, we've been able to do phenomenal work. We've got phenomenal support of people that has helped us get there. And hopefully we'll be able to service and support more people even in the coming years by using that center as a launch pad, so to speak.